A few months ago, I showed a way to build no-code, low-code mobile application using Appgyver. Now, that application was a static application, was within the UI. There was no backend, linked backend. In this video, I will show you a way to build a full-fledged application using no-code backend database. Now, for this demonstration, I will be using Google Firebase or Firestore database. If you want to play around with the Firestore or Firebase database, you can access on a Google console. It is free. There has a free tier which you can use it for your demo projects. And for front end, I will be using Appgyver. So if you don't have Appgyver access, go on Appgyver website and create an account for yourself, and you'll be able to use Appgyver and a Firebase for your practice. Now, the intention of this video is to show you a way to create a no-code, low-code application, a simple application without writing coding. So I will not be building anything complex. I'm not going to use Firestore functions, or I'm not going to combine multiple actions or combine multiple databases into, or multiple data source or documents into a single action. And the reason I'm not doing that is because I want to keep it simple, very, very simple. So let's get started. Let's create a project in Appgyver. I will go to the Appgyver page. Let's say create. We'll create a project called visitor log. So let's say visitor log, create. So this creates a project. We have an application now. Now let's go back to our Firebase console or Google console, and we'll create a new project here as well. So add a project. We'll name this as visitor log. Continue. Enable Google Analytics. You can enable if you want to keep a track of. I will just leave it default. It says select account. So I will select the Firebase account. Continue. And this will take a minute to create the artifacts. Okay, so our project is ready. Continue. Now here we can see our new project visitor log. Since I'm planning on to use it only on a web, but if you are planning on to use it for iOS or Android, you can create the apps here. You can see that we have iOS, we have Android, and then a web. I will be testing it in a web, so I will create a web app. Let's give a visitor log web. Also set up a Firebase hosting for this app. No, leave it. Register. So this gives you all the information you need to enter into a Appgyver, and these are the things. So I will just continue to console. We can go back and we can see that after. So let's go to Firebase, Firestore. Where is my project preview? We'll go there, display. So this is our project. You can see we have all the information here, which we have to enter into Appgyver. So let me go back to my Firestore database. So create database. Now there are two options when you create a database. It says production mode and a test mode. If you create a production mode, it's a lockdown database and you cannot access without authorization. If you create in a test mode, it will allow anybody to access your database. So be careful when you create. I would prefer to create a production mode, and then I'll show you how you can change this from production to authenticated users. So let's go with the production mode. Next, you have to select the location, US Central. I don't know if they have a Eastern, US Eastern. Yeah, that's fine. You cannot change it later, but that's fine. It doesn't really matter. Okay, so our Firestore database is ready now. Now we can create a collection. So let's call the collection ID visitors. Next, document ID, let's say auto ID fields. we'll say first name. Let's leave first name string. Then we'll have last name string in date. Say in date. Let's leave it for string for now, just for simplicity. In time, out date, out time. Auto ID and save. So we have visitors, we have first name, last name, in, date, time, out, date, time. So this is our structure for our project. Now we have our database and we can link this database in SAP Appgyver or Appgyver. So let's go back to Appgyver. First thing we need is the authentication. Now, like I said earlier, you can set up authentication. So only authenticated user will get access to the database. So let's go to Auth tab here and we'll enable authentication. Now you have two options here. You could use direct third-party authentication if you have something else, but for Firebase, they have a default or built-in support. So let's select that. And it will generate the login page. So it says Firebase Authentication and we are good. Now if we go to data here, data source, before going to data source, we need to configure connector. So go to the connectors tab and then turn on this radio button there. Then it will show you a lot of config options. And these parameters or properties are accessible on Firestore database in here. So if we go to project overview, go to the settings, and underneath here we have these parameters or properties. So let's go back here. We need a project ID. So I'll pick a project ID from here. We need auth domain. So auth domain should be here. Measurement ID. Again, the measurement ID is here. Storage bucket. Storage bucket is here. Then we need messaging sender ID. Messaging sender ID is this. That's all we need for the basic project config. Now, since we are using a web app, we can turn on the web app, and then we need a few additional details. So we need a web app ID and an API key. So if I go here, we have this API key that is our web API key, and then the web app ID. So the web app ID is in here, app ID. So let's get the app ID and save. So this creates a connection between Appgyver and a Firebase. Now we can set up our data source. So to set up a data source, we'll go to data sources, add data resources, and select Firebase. Now the resource name, we have to enter what we did here. So it's a visitor log. Visitor log. Collection name is the same. What's the collection? So if I go to the Firestore, collection is visitors. So let's do that, visitors. And by default, whenever you add Firestore as a resource, you will have ID as a default property, and then you can add the additional properties. So here we'll say first name, add, first name is text, we'll leave that as is, last name, add, then the new property is in date, in time, oops, and then outdate, outtime. So this is the structure in Firestore, which we can see first name, last name, in date, in time, outdate, and so we're just creating a structure of that service. And save database resource and save. So our database resource is configured in Appgyver. Now, if we go back to the auth, when we launch, we will have a Firebase login page, Appgyver login page, which is linked with Firestore. In Firestore, here if you notice here, it's I think it was earlier when we were creating, this expects as a user email ID and a password. So in Firestore, if you go there under authentications, here you can create users. So let's say authentication, get started. We will create a user, email ID, password, user. So enable, password is no, save. And then we will add, where is the user? Add a new provider? No, users. So sign in, you have to select a sign in method, and then you go to users tab and you add a user. So I will add my user and password, let's say test1234, not the super secure password. Let's leave test1234, add user. Okay, so we have a user now and we have a Firestore. But like I said earlier, when we were creating this database, we created as a production database. So by default, it will not give you access, and that we can configure it under rules. If you go to the rules here, the definition of if false, allow read write if false, that means do not allow anybody. So this database is not accessible at this point. To make it accessible, we can say if a request dot auth dot token is not null. That means if user is authenticated, it will have a token, and the system is going to check if there's a token, and if there's a token, then it will allow. So by adding this statement, we are making it user authenticated database. Now, so we set up the rules. We have we have a collection, we have user. So now let's go back to our Appgyver application. Let's get rid of these default components. And this page will say user list and say. So this is the default page when you launch a app, when you log in the app, it will bring you on this page. And for do I need to do something? Let me check the login page. So whenever you activate user auth for Firebase, it creates a page, this page. Let's check the flow functions for login. Password, and okay, so this looks good. The only thing is, and this is based on my experience, this is missing Firebase initialize. So if I go there, Firebase, there's a Firebase initialize Firebase flow function. You need this flow function to authenticate. So let's remove that. We'll bring the Firebase initialize Firebase flow function, and then we will connect authentication right after that. Okay, save. So with this change, we should have an application where you can authenticate yourself. We'll test it. So let's go back to our launch. Let's open in a web preview and let's log in. So that's my user and my super secure password and login. So So one task is done. We were able to authenticate ourselves on a Firestore or Firebase database. Now let's move on to the user list page. Now this is the user list page. As soon as you log in, you will see a list of users, and then you will have option to add or edit or delete. So on this page, let's get the container. So we can add a user list in the container, or we can even use the just the list item. But let's put it in a container. It's clean. We have a container, and under container we have a list. Now this is the UI, but we still need data source, data variable. So let's add that. Go to your variables, under data variables, and select your default resource, which is a visitor log, which we just created earlier here. And then we'll go back again in here. This is our repeat control, which will create multiple rows. So repeat with, map it to data variables, visitor log, and save. So this will repeat itself as many as records we have. And our primary, let's tag that to first name, save. You can customize this a repeat row, or you can build a custom one the way you want, but in this example I'm just going to use the standard. And secondary label, let's have a last name, save, and save. Now if we log in here, we should have a list. You can see there it shows one row, just that there is no value because we did not maintain anything. So if I go in here and let's say first name, let's say test, or let's say a test, and update. So we have this variable updated. Now if we go back and if we update, we should have one row with value. So you can see now we have a test, which is retrieved from the Firestore database. And we can also change the last name. Let's say a last name, update. And if we go back in again here and refresh, should bring the, I don't know why it is not written in the login. Login, and we have a last name and it is. So this covers the read portion of the database. You have a database, you're reading it and showing it on the user list. Now how about create? Next step is to create. So let's go back to our UI and let's make a change. We'll bring the row container over the top, on the top of the container. We'll make 3 cells, so we can have add button here and maybe possibly logout button after. But let's put first add button. We call add, and layout, position, no, width and height, let's say fit content, and alignment is left, so it stays on the left. And we'll change the color, let's say green is better. Now we should have add button here. Once it refreshes, we'll have add button. This looks nicer on a mobile though, and my intention is not to build a nicer application. My intention is to show you how it works. So we have an add action now. Since we have an add, we need an add page. So when we tap on add, it should call a page where we can enter details. So let's create another page. Go in here and add a new page. We'll call this as create visitor, or let's say visitor. Okay, so we have this create visitor page. Now to create, we need a form. We need to enter things, so we need a form. And for that, we will pick again we'll take the container, and then we'll pick bunch of input fields. So this is our first input, or just to keep it simple, I will just pull 2. Let's put under the container. Label, we don't need it. Let's have a placeholder, first name. Remove the label here too, and this is called last name. Save, and then we'll go to the variables. Again, we'll add our data variable, which is a visitor log. Then we'll go back to our first name and the last name, and in here we'll bind these to the data source. So data variable. Now this says we cannot bind why that would be. So we can, let me think, page variable, let's create, or app variable, let's create 2 variables. First name, leave it text, and last name. Save. We'll go back here, and then we'll bind to these app variables. App variable, first name, save. Go back, data variable, app variable, last name, save. So now we have these 2 variables, and we have to create. So we have to create an entity, and for that we'll go down in here, and okay, again we need a action. We have to tag that action to something, which is a button. So we'll say create, or submit. We can say submit instead, more generic. Submit. Style, again I don't like the yellow, so the blue one, so let's make it green. Let's leave the content, and let's align in the center, and save. Or you can leave it longer, so it doesn't really matter. Now on top of this submit action, we should create a record in a backend. For that, we'll go down in here in a flow functions, and we'll get the create collection flow function. We'll link that. Now when you click on create record, we have to select a resource. So resource is visitor log, which we have created earlier, and then the record. So we have to map these 2 fields to the record. So you select that, go in the object with properties, select your first name, select data variables, and select your app variable and first name. And there are several ways of doing this. You can create page variables, you can create app variables, or you can map it in a different way. This is the simplest way you can do it, and save. So what we did here is we mapped out these 2 fields to the create record collection or entity set, and whenever we perform this action, they should create a record in a backend. And then we can add those. So the first output is on success, so let's say record created successfully, and if it fails, we'll say error, failed to create record, and save. Now if we go back to our user list, the first page, very first page, on top of this add, we have to call our create page. So go down to the flow functions, and then there's a flow function open page. So drag that, link this, and in here select your page. Now since we have only one page, one other page than the user list, by default system will pick that. If it doesn't, just select your page here on the right hand side, and save. So now if we test, tap on add, it brings 2 fields here. So let's say b test, or b first name, and the last name. So these are the two new records. So it says record created successfully. Now if we go back in here, we should have one more record created, and we can see it here. So this is the new record. This is the old record. Though once we create, we should not be on this page. We should go back to the initial page or a user list page. So for that, we'll go again here in create visitor on submit. So this is a success and an error. So on success, we will navigate back. That's another flow function. But I think it will not show the error message. So let's see. It will not show the success message. And there's no output from toast. So let's see. Let's go back. And this is now broken, the flow, because we are stuck on a create page. So let's go back. We should have a way to go back. Test 1 2 3 4 super secure password. We have two entries now. Let's add another one. C first name, C last name, submit, and you can see. So we have a read action mapped, we have a create action mapped. Now we can work on an edit and a delete. So delete is easier than the edit. On top of this row, we'll navigate to a separate page, a different page, and on that page we will implement edit and a delete. So let's go back to Appgyver, because we need to create another page, add a page. Let's say update visitors, but anyway, update. Now let's remove these defaults. So when we tap on the row, this will bring on this page. So we expect to show more details, not just the name and a last name. So you can add all the fields, in the collection. But to keep it simple, I will use only two fields again, same fields. So first name and a last name. So here we don't want a label. This is first name. First name, this one no label, and last name. So we have these two fields, first name and a last name, and since we created those app variables earlier, we can map these, and then when we tap on a row, we'll fill those, so we see the data being passed from our user list to the update page. So let's go in here, select that, and bind to value, data variable, app variable, first name, save, select last name, data variable, app variable, last name, and save, and of course we need a submit, so we can trigger action to update record in a backend. Submit. Let's change style to the same color, in a layout, width, fit content, and let's position it in the center. Okay, now on submit, we have to update a record in a backend, and then we have to navigate back the way we did it in a create. First, let's assign, or let's call this update page on top of the row. So we'll go back to our user list in here, select a row, a single row, and in down here in a flow function, select the open page flow function and connect that, and in the open page select update page instead the create page. Now this will open the page, but we did not pass any data from this page to the next page. So for that, we can do here, use another variable or flow function called set app variables. Actually, we can link this first. We can have two of them because we have two variables to update. So first variable, first name, assign value. So select that and select the data atom in repeat, current, and first name. Second, Same process, a different field, last name, and save. So we have these two variables populated before transfer to the next page, and then we can link our open page flow function here. Okay, so this will open our update page, and on update page we have these two fields which will show the current content, and then the submit button. On submit, we have to update a record. Now to update, we'll pick update flow function, update record. We'll link that here. And again, now for update, we need ID along with the fields. So in here in Firestore database, we have these fields. So these are the fields of a collection, but there's no key here. But if you see it here, the document has a key, and this is the key sent as an ID. So in here, when we created a source, data source, there was a default ID field. This ID field brings the key of the document. If we pass this key in an update, it will find out which document to be updated. But we did not create app variable for key, and that we can add it here. So let's add another variable called ID. Text is fine. And then we have to update it in a user list. So user list. In here we have we were updating 2 variables. Now we have to do it 3 variables, so we can get the key of the document. And again, select the setup variable flow function, connect with the tab, and you can connect an output to the open page. And in a variable here, select your app variable ID and assign value, repeat in that item in repeat, and select ID, save. So we got 3 values. We got first name, last name, and ID. And then we will go back to our update page, and on submit action, update record. Now, like I showed you earlier, this ID is a mandatory to update, because without key, system doesn't know which record to update. So let's map ID with the variable which we created as ID. So that links the specific record in a database. But then again, we have to pass the updated values as well, and that you can do it under record. Select this, select object with properties, select first name, and select data variables, app variables, and first name. Do the same thing for last name, app variable, last name, and save, and save. So any changes in these 2 fields will be stored in apps variable, and when we push it to backend, those app variables will assign value to the object, and it will update in a backend. Save. So let's go back in here again. Now we have a test. So tap on a test, which brings to update. We can see it here, and we can update. So for whatever reason, we do not have last name. I think I did not map it, or I mapped it wrong. Let me go in here, properties. Yeah, where is it? Last name is good. So where did I miss it? Use list, tap. Current last name, and do we have a last name for this one? A last name. So we have it. This one is first name, that is a last name. Current ID. Oh, okay. The variable name, if you notice here, I'm using the same variable for these 2, and this is supposed to be last name, not the first name. That is why we didn't see the last name. Now if I tap on this, I have a test as a first name and a last name as a last name. So let's update this to add a U here and submit. And if we go back in here, you see we have a U here. but it did not go back because we did not add the flow function to go back, and that's what we do next. So let's go back to the update page, submit. Once we update, we can add a toast message like what we did in a create. Okay, navigate back. So on successful, show message, and then go back, and on error, just show message and stay where it is. So here, record updated successfully, and in here, failed or error, failed to update record. Now I'm putting a custom message, but if you want to get the actual error message from a backend, you can go in here in a mapping function, and you can select, like if you go in here, you can select output value from another node. The another node is the previous flow function, which is the update. And in there, you have an option update record. Under update record, you will have error code message, and a raw error message. So you can technically map this directly to show exact error message instead masking it to something else. In this case, I wrote a custom error message. By writing custom, you will lose the ability to find out what went wrong, but you have option to map it. So now if we go back again, update that, let's remove you and submit. Now the last thing is we need to delete this record. So let's add a button beside submit to delete it. Not really ideal, but let's put it there. Let's get the row container so we can put two side by side in two cells. So this we will call delete. Let's have a different style. Same thing, fit content, and save. Now on delete, we have to delete the record from database. We do not really need any fields as such. We just need the record ID, and that you can do it. So first we need the flow function, get the delete record flow function, and connect it to the component tab. And in here select resource. If you have more than one, you have to select the one which you want to perform action on. If you have just one, system will select the default one. And then we have to pass the ID. Since we have ID already in app variable, we'll go there, we'll pick the app ID and save. And then pretty much we can do the same thing. So we can just copy these three flow functions which we have, custom flow functions, and we'll bring them here. So that way we don't have to recreate those, and then we'll map on success we show record deleted, and then we go back to the list, and on error we show the error message. We'll change this, record deleted successfully, and then it goes back, and this failed to delete record, and save. So now we have a list here. Let's pick this one. We have submit if we change, and we have a delete here. So if I delete, it deletes a record and shows a message, and in a database we should have only 2 records. So it's very simple. If you use Firestore and Appgyver, you do not need to write any coding at all. Like you just saw, I did not write any coding either in a backend or in the front end. It's fairly straightforward to create applications. So that's all for this video. My name is Shankar Gumari, and see you in the next video.